This is lesson 20.2, industrialization in Europe and the world. So we're moving out of Great Britain and we're spreading onto the continent. How did countries in Europe and the world respond to the challenge of industrialization? And we've got College Board topic 6.1, once again, contextualizing industrialization and its origins and effects. Explain the context in which industrialization originated, developed, and spread in Europe. The Industrial Revolution spread from Great Britain to the continent, where the state played a greater role in promoting industry. Following the British example, industrialization took root in continental Europe, sometimes with state sponsorship. And we've still got College Board topic 6.2, the spread of industry throughout Europe. Explain the factors that influenced the development of industrialization in Europe from 1815 to 1914. France moved toward industrialization at a more gradual pace than Great Britain, with government support and with less dislocation of traditional methods of production. And there was a reason for that with regard to France. It was not necessarily what you'd call a bad idea or them acting slow or anything like that. A combination of factors, including geography, lack of resources, the dominance of traditional landed elites, the persistence of serfdom in some areas, and inadequate government sponsorship, accounted for Eastern and Southern Europe's lag in industrial development. And because of the continued existence of more primitive agricultural practices and landowning patterns, some areas of Europe lagged in industrialization while facing famine, debt, and land shortages. Well, our place is now Britain, France, Germany, and Russia, and our time frame is still 1780 to 1850. Key concepts of the industrialization of Europe: the Zollverein, the idea of a limited liability, tariff protection, and deindustrialization. Key people of the industrialization of Europe: William Cockerill and Friedrich Fritz Harkort. So in 1750, European countries and Asian countries were, as we said before, roughly equal in per capita levels of industrial output. By 1800, Britain had jumped ahead significantly, and throughout the 1800s, European countries advanced to the extent that they emulated the British model. In other words, the better they were able to emulate that model, the faster they advanced. Some were very fast, like Belgium and the German states. Some were slower, like France and Italy and Russia. By 1913, Europe, the U.S., and Japan had pulled out way ahead of the rest of the world. India and China, by contrast, had actually decreased significantly in their per capita production. What kinds of difficulties did continental Europe run into as they were industrializing? Well, as we already know, from 1793 to 1815, the French Revolution, the French Republic, and the Napoleonic Wars were going on. These wars were very tough on Britain economically. There was high unemployment, high inflation, but the continent experienced huge amounts of extended disruption. And cheaply produced British goods dominated the world market. And we actually saw an example of that from lesson 19.3 when we talked about the Eden Treaty between Britain and France, which was based on the ideas of Adam Smith. The French were trying those out, and it was devastating to large sectors of the French economy. The learning curve. British technology had advanced beyond the understanding of many European technicians. Steam engines, they were expensive to buy, expensive to operate. Capital investment was difficult to secure, and workers didn't want to work in factories. What kinds of advantages did continental Europe have over the rest of the world when it came to industrializing? They had the putting out system as an advantage. They had merchant capitalism. They did have skilled urban artisans. These skilled urban artisans often made luxury items that were unique to the region, for example, fine wines and perfumes and silks, etc. Often the better business decision was not to mechanize the process of making these items. The art of making these was too fine, too subtle, too nuanced for a machine to do. Another advantage that continental Europe had was that there was no need to develop new technology from scratch. They could simply borrow that technology from Britain. Also, European nations had strong independent governments. They couldn't be dominated by Britain or anyone else. And many countries outside of Europe did not have this advantage. What factors pushed industrialization on the European continent forward? People who left England and went to the continent, for one. For example, William Cockerill and his son John Cockerill. They defied British law forbidding artisans from leaving Britain. That was in existence till 1825. And they defied British law forbidding the export of textile machinery that was on the books until 1843. They built a huge industrial enterprise in Belgium, and they brought many other British workers with them. Europeans who imitated British accomplishments was another factor. For example, Friedrich, also known as Fritz Harkort, the Watt of Germany, also known as the father of the Ruhr, as in the Ruhr Valley. He built and sold steam engines in Germany, and he actually outgrew his investment capital, and that is not a good thing because that will cause you to go bankrupt. Another factor was tariff protection. France passed tariffs against cheap British goods eventually, and the German states formed a trade agreement called the Zollverein. It was kind of a trading club, and goods within the Zollverein moved freely without tariffs. But goods coming into the Zollverein from outside, these got heavy tariffs. And because of the protection that it afforded industries, German states who participated in the Zollverein experienced spectacular industrial growth. Another factor was government projects on things like roads and canals and railroads. Another factor was banking innovations. As a general rule, banks, of course, need investors in order to be able to provide capital to industry. And two Belgian banks during this time came up with the concept of limited liability. They needed government approval to establish this product, but luckily the government was pro-industrial development at the time. So what is limited liability? You even hear that phrase going around today. Limited liability says this: if you buy stock in a company, you're now a part owner because you have part ownership in the company, and that company goes bankrupt and owes a bunch of people money, you lose your investment, but that's all you lose. Nobody to whom that company owes money can come after you personally. The liability is limited. And this attracted many more investors because the risk was so greatly reduced. Why did some other countries fall short in their attempts to industrialize? Examples: Russia and Egypt, which was part of the Ottoman Empire at the time. These countries also tried to modernize and industrialize, but they couldn't compete with the lower-priced goods of these more advanced countries. And modernizing is hard work. It's not easy. And these countries eventually just found it easier to continue to export raw materials and agricultural products. Colonial subjects. Colonial governments did not have the autonomy to impose tariffs on their European overlords. And their European overlords freely imposed tariffs on them. So colonies weren't going to get very far either. Some countries actually experienced deindustrialization due to imperialism, competition, uprisings which drew attention to the military and away from commerce and industry. For example, China.